We're doing a review of the portion of Mishpatim in volume 26. This is the second Sikha for the Parsha of Mishpatim. We're doing the Sikha in loving memory and for the benefit of the soul of our dear son, Rabbi Levi Yitzchok, who was a dedicated shliach, a successful shliach, who reached out with love and compassion to the entire community. And unfortunately, he was taken away in the prime of his life. May his memory be for a blessing. And Tehei Nishmasei Tzrura B'Tzera Chaim. The Sikha of Parshas Mishpatim is also a siyum for the tractate Baba Basra, both on the Babli in Yerushalmi, as the Rebbe brings down in this star here. It is a discussion in the Gemara and the Babli in Yerushalmi with regards when a person becomes a guarantor, so that he becomes responsible, that if the borrower does not have money to pay, then he is obligated to pay. The question becomes, what happens when a person accepts and becomes a guarantor after the loan has been made? Sometimes you can become a guarantor. You say that the person would not lend the money if he didn't have somebody guaranteeing it. So in that case, the guarantor doesn't need to make a special kinyan in order for the guarantor, for the Arev, to be responsible to pay when the borrower doesn't have the money or doesn't pay. So no kinyan is required. The issue becomes, if you want to become a guarantor for a loan, not at the time that the loan is taking place, but later on, whether you need a kinyan for that. And we have seemingly a commentary according to the interpretation of the Pnei Moshe on the Yerushalmi, according to him, that there is no disagreement between the Babli and the Yerushalmi, that they both say the same thing. But the way the Rebbe will show that the Yerushalmi disagrees on the Babli, and the Rebbe will explain the whole idea. How does one obligate themselves as an Arev? What is the basis for that? And that's the two approaches that will explain why the Babli says different to Yerushalmi. It's a very detailed and a very insightful discussion. So, as they say in Yiddish, with a halten Kopf, you have to keep and stay focused on the discussion here. We'll see. We'll try to do the best we can as we go through the Sikha. So, of course, because we're talking about the laws of Mishpatim over here, that's why it's part of the Parshas Mishpatim. And the Rebbe first quotes from the conclusion of the tractate of Baba Basra. So, Aleph, in Siyum Masechta Baba Basra, in the conclusion of the tractate Baba Basra, in the Letzter Mishnah, in the last Mishnah, state, over there it says that Orev hayoytzer la'achar chitum shtoris goyve menechosim b'nei chodim. That if somebody who is responsible takes on responsibility after this document was already signed, so basically the document was done, so then goyve menechosim b'nei chodim. So when the lender collects from the guarantor, he cannot collect but from the assets that have not been sold by the guarantor, not from the Mishubadim, things that the guarantor may have sold, only from the free, because if in the document, people don't know, and therefore people bought from the guarantor, and they should not be losing their uh, their uh, uh, their field because they did not know. The Mishnah continues, Maise Ubo Lifnei Rabbi Yishmael. So there once happened that a case like this, in which the guarantor guaranteed the loan after the loan was already signed, documented, the IOU, the document was already signed, and he undertook later on. And it came to Rabbi Yishmael, where does the lender collect from the guarantor? The borrower didn't have money to pay. But Amar and Rabbi Yishmael said, that he can collect from assets that have not been sold. So basically, he's still responsible for it, but we can't collect from the guarantor's assets that he has sold after that to go collect after the buyers from the guarantor. But anything that the guarantor has that is free, that has not been sold, the lender can collect because the borrower isn't paying. So Amar Loi Ben Nanas. So Ben Nana disagreed with Rabbi Yishmael. He doesn't think that the person is responsible at all. He said that Eina Goive Loi Menechosim Mishubodim V'Loi Menechosim B'nei Chayrim. So you can't collect nothing. You don't collect from the guarantor at all, not from the sold assets that are linked sort of to the loan, but also not from the free assets that the guarantors has. Omar Loi, so Rabbi Shmuel says to Ben, uh, so he said to him, Lama Omar Loi, Lama, no, sorry, so really Omar Loi Lama. So Ben Nana says that it doesn't, you're not a guarantor, you're not responsible, but he does take responsibility. So Rabbi Shmuel says to him, why not? Lama, why not? Amar Loisu, Ben Nana explains why he doesn't believe that the guarantor is responsible at all. So he gives the reasoning, he says, by bringing an example. He says, Hare hachoinek is echad bashuk. So a guy was choking his friend in the marketplace. Gives him an extreme case. He owed him money and he's not paying. So he was choking him to get his money. So the guy sees that the lender is killing the debtor. So his friend says, you know what? He meets up, he sees that he's about to choke the borrower. He says, Hanachloi, let him go, vani etenloch, and I will pay for you. He says, and then later on, when the lender comes to the uh, guarantor who told him to let him go, and he wants to collect, so he says, obviously, Potter, that the guarantor is exempt, doesn't really have to pay. He said, I'm a guarantor. He says, Shaloi alemunosei helavohu. He did not lend the money to, the lender did not lend on the belief and the trust of the guarantor. The guarantor wasn't there. That's not why he loaned him. And the only time the guarantor would be responsible if the reason the lender gave the money to the borrower because the guarantor was guaranteeing it. But in this case, he didn't give it to him because he guaranteed it. So Benana says, what would be a orev that he would be obligated to pay? The guarantor has to pay to the lender, if he says hilvohu v'ani noisen loch chayiv, if he says to him, you lend him the money, I'll pay. If he doesn't pay, so then the guarantor needs to pay the debt if the borrower doesn't pay it. Shekain al almonose hilvo, because then you actually loaned him because you trusted you trusted the guarantor. That is why you gave the loan, and therefore you have a right to collect from the guarantor. And then, so who's right over here? So we'll see. The Mishnah concludes, and the Mishnah is Messiah. Can you collect from a guarantor when it's done afterwards? Omar Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael said, one who wants to be smart should occupy himself in monetary cases. Because there is no section in Torah which is greater than the monetary cases. That makes a person wise. It's like a flowing fountain, a well that flows. There's so much wisdom there. Now, so you have to be busy with monetary issues of the Gemara. Who do you reach to come to monetary issues? And if you want to occupy yourself in monetary, you should actually serve a Shimon ben Anas. Basically, he praised them and say that Shimon ben Anas was an expert in the monetary cases, and if you want to become smart and you want to occupy in monetary cases, you should serve up to Shimon ben Anas. So the Gemara says on this, so the praise almost implies that the halacha should be like Rabbi Shimon ben Anas, because we're saying he is the one who is occupied in the Dinei Mamonos. But yet, the Gemara, in the Mishnah, the Gemara says, Amar Rabba bar Chana said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yochanan, that Afal Pisha Kilas Rabbi Yishmael is ben Nanas. Even though Rabbi Yishmael praised ben Nanas and he says that he is the one, Halacha Kimoiser, the Halacha remains like Rabbi Yishmael and not like ben Nanas, that you will be able to collect from a guarantor who wasn't there at the time of the loan, and you still can collect. Then the Gemara Mamshich, then the Gemara continues, Iboyu Chonuk Mali. So the asked in the yeshiva the question, what would be in a case when a person is being choked? Amar Rabbi Yishmael. So says Rabbi Yishmael that Toshma. So what's the question over here? The Rashbam says, what's the question by Bechonot Mali? So the Rashbam says the question is, Dilma mishum tzayda de chavre shenechnak nami gomaru makne. That maybe he sees that his friend here is saying that you need to, Rabbi Shmuel says that that you do, you are responsible, even at least in Bnei Chodim, but you're responsible if you undertook to pay. But this case is an extreme case because maybe in this case, he's trying to save him from death, though maybe he shouldn't be responsible to pay. If you obligate yourself, okay, you're obligated. But in a case like that, Mali Omar Rabbi Yishmael, he basically says, what would Rabbi Yishmael say to read it. Mali Amar Rabbi Shmuel. What would Rabbi Shmuel say in a case where the guy is saving his life, as the Rashbama says, Dilmo mishum tzayda de chavre shenechnek nami gomeru makne, because his friend is in pain, that he's being choked, he's dying, so he makes up his mind, and it's not like on his own he's agreeing to undertake a loan for a responsibility, but guy's being choked, so he says, okay, I'll be responsible. Or maybe he's intending, it's all the words of the Rashbam, that he's intending to save him from being choked. He's doing a mitzvah, and there is nothing that he made the lender lose. The lender lent already the money. The lender is just trying to kill now the borrower, who's trying to choke him for not paying. So it turns out that the guarantor didn't make the lender lose any money. The borrower borrowed from him. Therefore, it's not an orv in an extreme case in which he is saving somebody from death. The Rashbam. So what says Toshma? Come and listen. Rabbi Yaakov said to Rabbi Yochanan, Choluk hoyu Rabbi Yishmael av b'chonuk, that Rabbi Yishmael disagrees also by Chanuk, and he does take on responsibility, even he's choking him. If he says that he's going to be responsible, Rabbi Yishmael holds that you will be able to collect from him. So what is the halacha? In the extreme case of Chanuk, do we say that Rabbi Shmuel is also the halacha is like Rabbi Shmuel? Because previously the Gemara says that no halacha is like Rabbi Shmuel, because while we praised Rabbi Yochanan ben Nanes, Rabbi Yochanan praised him, but the halacha is like Rabbi Shmuel in our Mishnah, that you could guarantee the loan and you're responsible to pay, even if you accept it upon yourself, you indebted yourself as an orev after the loan. But if it's an extreme case of that he's being choked, and maybe in that case you're doing a mitzvah, so you would not have to pay. Toshma, is the halacha or not? Toshma, also Ravin Rabbi Yochanan. Ravin came and said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he disagrees, even in the case that he's being choked, that he'll have to pay if he accepted upon himself that he's going to become an orif. But and the halacha is like Rabbi Yishmael. Also, in a case in which he's being choked, we're going to say, if you undertook to become a guarantor, you are going to have to pay if the borrower doesn't pay. So that's what the Gemara brings down. But the Gemara is Ober Mesayim, Ober Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda is saying in the name of Shmuel that only Chonuk v'Konu miyodim mishtabed, that there's a whole new requirement over here. Just by undertaking to be an Arev without making a kinyan, you will not be chayiv, not like Rabbi Yishmael. You will not be responsible. He says, if Chanuk v'Konu miyodei, if you made a kinyan for that guarantor mishtabed, then you would be enslaving yourself. And Miklal, the Arev ba'alma loy boyi kinyan. So that means a normal Arev would not require a kinyan. And you'd be mechuyev just because he is accepting upon himself. He's giving the loan because of you. But by a Chanuk, you require a kinyan. So the Gemara says, Miklal dar ba'alma boyi kinyan. The Hilchasa, and the Gemara finally concludes, what is the halacha? That Orev b'shas matan mois loy boyi kinyan. If you're an Orev at the time that you give the money, there is no kinyan required. But achar matan boys. But if you become an Orav after boyikin requires a kinyan. So das meint as by Chanuk ver der was Omar Hanach. That means that when the person is being choked, and then he says, "Leave him alone," Meshubet davke mitakinyan. You're only enslaved with a kinyan. Atkan divri hagamore in Babli. This is the Gemara in Babli. So the halacha is basically like Rabbi Yishmael in the Mishnah, the case of Chanuk that the Gemara brings down, that if you tell him, let him go, and I will pay, you'll be potter, if there was no kinyan. But if there is a kinyan, that's different. If there's a kinyan, then you're high because of the kinyan. So basically, the Gemara rules like Benanes, not like Rabbi Yishmael. That's the way the conclusion of the Gemara of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel is b'shas matan mois loy boy kinyan, but acha matan mois boy kinyan. Actually, any time that you want to become an Orev, whether it's Chanuk or not Chanuk, you have to have a kinyan. So in the case of Chanuk, if he said Hanach, you need a kinyan. Akta different more in Babli. So the Babli ends up saying that you need a kinyan, and without a kinyan, you're not mechuyuv. You're not going to collect, not from the chosim Mishpatim, not from the chosim Menachayim, if there was no kinyan. Base. So now the question is, what is the ruling of the Yerushalmi? We'll see an interpretation of the Yerushalmi that learns that what the Yerushalmi is saying is different than what the conclusion is in the Babli base. But the Rebbe is going to say, no, actually, first we'll learn that the Yerushalmi says the same as the Babli, and the Rebbe is going to show that the Yerushalmi disagrees on the Babli in what the Yerushalmi believes the halacha is. Base. In Yerushalmi, dort zog the Gemara. In Yerushalmi, the Gemara says, similar to what our Gemara says, that the Rabbi Yosef b'shem Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yosef said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Afal pisha kilsu Rabbi Yishmael as Ben Nanas. Even though Rabbi Yishmael praised Ben Nanas, Shmuel says, Aroitza lachim should go and learn by Ben Nanas. Al Medrashi kilsei. So he only praised him for the Medrash. Avalena halacha Ben Nanas. Halacha not like Ben Nanas. That's like the beginning of our piece of Gemara, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yishmael and not like Ben Nanas, that you could collect even from an Orev without a kinyan. After the loan, you still can collect from the Orev. That's the Gemara beginning in Yerushalmi, like the Gemara by us. Now, the Gemara continues that Shimon Bar Vova b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, he, the name of Rabbi Yochanan says, Af b'chonuk halacha ke Rabbi Yishmael, also like the Gemara says, by us, different Gersos here, but it's a reading from the Sikha, that even by a case of Chanuk, where he's trying to save him, still the halacha is that I like Rabbi Yishmael, that he enslaved himself, even though he's saving his life. Aber in Yerushalmi wird nicht gebracht the Memre von Shmuel, but over there we don't bring the saying that Shmuel bring down as Davke Chanuk that you need a kinyan, which our Gemara brings down, which actually tells us that the halacha is like Rabbi Yishmael. You need the Gemara brings down by us. But over there, the Gemara doesn't bring down specifically the case of Shmuel, that part that you need a kinyan, which actually tells us the halacha is like Rabbi Shmuel, not like bananas. The Gemara doesn't bring that down. That you need a kimishtabed. It doesn't bring down the end that the which is all like bananas that you need to have if at the time when he gives the money you don't need a kinyan, but after matnos you need a kinyan, which tells us that if there was no kinyan, then you won't be able to collect from the other, which is exactly like bananas, not like the Rabbi Shmuel. Nashtodem is the Rishalm Messiah. What does the Rishalm conclude? Now the question is, what is the meaning in these words in the Rishalm? He says, Omar Rabbi Yosef was Shema. The Shmamino. Barnash, the Havet Tzorich L'Chavre B'Shuka. David Tzayid L'Chavre B'Shuka. He says, what happens when a person was trapping somebody who was trying to get back at somebody in the street. Also, Chad Vamar Shafke. So one comes and says, leave him alone and I will give. So then, more he says, Min ahen gavie umehen le gavie. He says he's going to collect from the person that saved him and not anymore from the person that he was choking. The fact that the other person committed to him that even though that he's going to pay in order to save the other person's life, then he's only going to collect from the person that guaranteed it, and not anymore from the one who owned it. What is the meaning of the Gemara? Learn their Pnei Moshe. So Moshe says we're learning it in a rhetorical way. As Divrei Rabbi Yossi, what Rabbi Yossi is saying here is kimat miha. He's like wondering. If we're going to say that also by the case he's choking, and still Rabbi Shmuel is correct that you're going to be able to collect from him, because in the Yerushalmi he says that, so he's saying, if you're going to say that so it turns out as when einer is sayid lechavre b'shuk. So when somebody is hunting and trying to trap his friend in this place, meloshin tzudo lakachas nafshi, tzuda tzayid mean to trying to kill him. Unakvitzveit kommt und sagt. And the other one comes and says, leave him alone and I will pay you. Don't kill him, I'll pay. Darf der mal vegoyre sein, nicht von dem Leiber, then he should collect from not from the one, the borrower, nor from them was Omar Shavki, told him leave him alone. Meaning it doesn't make sense to say, just collect from him. Vorum. How would he become his? How does the one who said leave him alone and I'll pay become his, owes you the money? He only had in mind to save that person. You're killing him. He wanted to save him because of a mitzvah. I'm doing a mitzvah. So b'meila, we're not learning it that you're taka collecting. It's rhetorically. Shall we say that you're going to collect just from the other one because he stepped in? He's trying to save his life. So that means basically that as the Maskone Yerushalmi Benidin Zeh, that the concluding of the Yerushalmi in this case, when you were choking him, is Azevi the Maskone in Bavli, is the same conclusion as the Bavli. Verzoktim Mara Aponim Dort, as the Mara Aponim explains there. As Bachonuk is the halacha Nit be Rabbi Yishmael, that when it comes to a chonuk and you're saving somebody's life, you won't be able to collect from him. Nit be Rabbi Yishmael, v'chazok as mishabed nafshe on a kinyan that says you can be mishabed yourself without a kinyan. No, he's saving the guy's life. So in that case, you're going to need, when it's a chonuk, a case that you're doing a mitzvah trying to save him, you're not going to be responsible. That's the conclusion of Yerushalmi. It's rhetorically saying, and since so by a chanuk, what he was trying to tell him, Rabbi Yossi, what they was trying to say with Rabbi Yossi when he says, "V'ashma minei barnashna v'tzorich," he was saying to you, you can't say that he's going to collect from the second one, and therefore you don't collect from him in a case where the guy is saving the other one's life. Like Zayin Pirush Kumtois, according to his interpretation, it turns out, Adi Maskone Yerushalmi is Azevi Maskone Babli, Verzokti Mara upon him. As Bachonok is the Locha Nit V'Rabbi Yishmael, V'Chazok Na Mishabet Nafshe Rakim, that you enslave yourself without a king. She's over Adeicha Godel to Befader Zayin Be'ofen Zeh B'Divrei Rabbi Yossi B'Yerushalmi. This is his way, rhetorically still. Naniach has Ab B'Chonok Halocha Kemoisei. So let's even say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yishmael. Und der sagt Shavke, and if you say Shavke is Mishabed Nafshi, is Mishabed himself without a king, is Mishabed. Is aber Menolon das main, but how would you know that this also means that is Mishabed bis zu werden der Balchev? He enslaves him, that he becomes the loaner, he's the one that's going to pay. Am is given from him, not from Levi, that you collect from him, and not from Levi. As he explains the one to Rabbi Yossi. So, how do we know that? Why would this be a challenging question to Rabbi Yishmael? He's saying, would that become the debtor? We didn't say that the guarantor becomes the debtor. We're only saying is that he can enslave himself, that if the lender doesn't pay, he can pay. Unitvis is mashma from their sugya, unlike which really what it seems that nobody ever wanted to make the order the one they own, the one who owns the loan. Unitvis is mashma from their sugya, not as it appears from the discussion as a shibud is betrayed order that he's only enslaving as a guarantor. Vahainu, so that means as the chayv likt euch weiter from leiva. That's all that we were saying. Rabbi Shmuel said that you can enslave yourself, even in a case where you're being choked, but you would be able to enslave yourself. But who owes the money? The borrower, and the borrower would have to pay. If he doesn't pay, then that's all what we were saying over here. And first, the lender should demand the money by the borrower. The Mishnah explains. So, how would this be? How was the Bnei Moshe learn the Gemara is saying? Can't be that the Arav is responsible, because or else he would be the one that paying and not. Nobody's saying that. He were only saying that he can be responsible after you will go to the borrower, and if he doesn't pay. So why are you asking such a proof against Rabbi Yishmael rhetorically that it can't be that by Chanuk he enslaves himself? So that's hard to learn like that. Zois ve'oid. This, and in addition to that, if you pirush hapnei Moshe, according to the interpreter Moshe, is Smias Rabbi Yossi. What is Rabbi Yossi's question over there? You said this if the tam that's based on the rationale, the reason was loy hoya miskaven elolahatzila, that he never had in mind but to save them. So he didn't want to undertake he didn't really mean to pay. That's the rationale for Rabbi Yossi's wondering, why would he be responsible? Is it the who atam from bananas in the Mishnah? So then that's the exact reason that Bananas says in the Mishnah that why do you not take responsibility? Rabbi Shmuel explained this. So he said, if one choking somebody, would he then be responsible? He's trying to help him. So how could he be responsible? So what is Rabbi Yossi proving Rabbi Yishmael's din from the same argument that Rabbi Shmuel already said in the Mishnah? And still there's a machlokes between bananas. I mean, about that bananas already said in the Mishnah. So what is Rabbi Yossi saying? No, bananas is right. If that's what Rabbi Yossi is saying, oh, bananas is right because he only did it to save his life. But that was the argument that bananas said in the Mishnah. What is his chiddush? How is he proving like bananas and not like Rabbi Shmuel, according to the interpretation of the Pnei Moshe? The Rebbe disagrees in the interpretation. As divrei Rabbi Yossi Birushalmi is a hemshech to freer. It's not rhetorically, and it's not the same conclusion as the Babli, but it's continuing to what it said before. Av b'chonuk halocha Rabbi Yishmael. He's telling you, even in the case of choking, the halocha is like Rabbi Shmuel and not like bananas. And Rabbi Yossi kumt mazmizayim, what he's coming to explain, pravos oich b'chonuk is mishtabed b'li kinyan. How is he being enslaved without a kinyan? So he says, Kidl Kamon, as the Rebbe will explain later on, what the Rabbi Yossi is explaining here. But what he's trying to explain is not against Rabbi Yishmael, that for Rabbi Yishmael, that even by Chanuk, he's Meshabed himself. Like Rabbi Yishmael says, in all cases, you are taking on the responsibility, even Shalei B'Shas Al-Ba'asei. And B'li Kinyan. B'Li Kinyan. And there's no Kinyan come on behind. So then we have a disagreement. As in Yerushalmi is the Maskona Nidvi in Babli. Then Yerushalmi, the conclusion is not like in the Babli. As by Chonuk is the Omar Shavke Mishabet Nafshe Oich Ona Kinyan. That when the person is being choked, in other words, you're coming to save him, then he is enslaving himself, even without making a kinyan. So the Yerushalmi concludes, like Rabbi Yishmael, even by Chanuk, and that you don't need a kinyan. And the explanation is what the Rabbi Yossi is saying, as the Rebbe will explain later on. And so in the Babli, in a case of Chanuk, the halacha is like bananas. And without a kinyan, he's not Meshabed himself. And in the Yerushalmi, he concludes like Rabbi Shmuel that even in a case of Chanuk, he is Meshabed Nafshi. And the rationale is what Rabbi Yossi says, as the Rebbe will explain. But Yeshloimar, and the Rebbe says, as deep looked at zwischen Babli and Yerushalmi, this argument between the Babli and the Yerushalmi, that when you become a guarantor after the money has already been given, so the person is not loaning him the money because of your responsibility. Can you really enslave yourself without a kinyan? Do you need a kinyan to enslave or not? Is a plukta klolis in them geder v'sibas hashidul v'utfnor. This is a general disagreement in the definition and the cause, the reason why a guarantor enslaves himself. This machlokes, whether after the loan you can enslave yourself or not, is something which the Babli and Yerushalmi disagree about the definition, how a Orev becomes enslaved, and that will depend that according to the Bavli, you could enslave yourself even acher matan mois, so you don't need a kinyan. And I mean, you need a kinyan according to the Bavli, like Banana, you need a kinyan, you cannot enslave yourself. And according to the Yerushalmi, you could, the halach is like Rabbi Shmuel, that you could enslave yourself even though there's no kinyan. When we'll understand how does the kinyan, how does the shibud of the Orev take place. Okay, this is complicated, but the bottom line is the Rebbe is going, it's going to get easier now. The Rebbe is going to explain, can a person just become an Orev after the loan was made? What does it take to become an Orev, to enslave yourself? Can you become an Orev after the loan was already made, or you need the loan to be made before? You need the Orev to become before. Now, if you make a kinyan, okay, that's not an issue. That seems, everybody agrees with that. You could make a kinyan later on, you'll become an Orev. But an Orev without a kinyan, does it help after the loan was already made? To enslave yourself depends on the how. Enslave, as Rebbe will explain in Ois Gimel. Ois Gimel. Benegeya an Orev b'shas matan mois, as it relates to a guarantor, when you give the money, Zokt Rabashi. So Rabashi says, how does the person become responsible, enslaved, just because he said that I am going to take responsibility, I'll guarantee, but he didn't receive anything. The borrower receives the money, he has to pay it back. The guarantor seemingly hasn't received anything. So what makes him responsible? How does he become responsible when he didn't receive anything? So Rabashi Zoktu. So what does Rabashi say? Bahu hanoah to come ham. He gets a pleasure that the lender believes him. He trusts him that he's going to pay back if the borrower doesn't pay back. Gomaru mishtabed nafshi. So he decides and he enslaves himself. So he does receive something. He receives the believability that the guy believes him, and that's a pleasure. That's called receiving something. That receiving of that pleasure, that the guy trusts him, that he obligates himself and he becomes responsible. But pashtus metis, and what does it mean simply? Ukemashma for Kama Poskim, it also appears from many of the codifiers as the hanoah welcher is mekabel von sein mehemen, that the enjoyment that he receives, that he's a trustworthy, that he believes him, is genug to oifton dem mishtabed nafshi, that is sufficient to accomplish, to enslave yourself. It's as if you received something. That's enough that you are trusted. Aber the Nemuki Yosef in Sima Masechta, but the Nemuki Yosef in the end of the tractate, Benigeya Orev b'shas mat moed, when he talks about an Orev at the time that he gave the money, Zokt, he says it a little differently. Ados was mishtabed b'le kinyan, the fact that you can be enslaved even though there was no kinyan, is kivon de alpiv hoitzi ma'osuv mitachas yodei. Since it's based on your saying that the other guy, the other person took out the money and gave it. So why is he giving the money? Is because you said. It is your saying that brought this person to take the money and give it. He says this with more explanation in a previous Gemara, previous discussion. He says, even though there is no acquisition, there's no kinyan over there. It's just saying, I'll be responsible. That's how he becomes enslaved. So still, he's responsible. Why? The Motze Amar Le Hamalve, the lender can say to the guarantor, Im lo hoyisa ato, if you weren't there, lo hoyisi malve oisa klal, then I would not have lent him. The reason I lent him was because you said. That's why I gave the money. Similar, it's written that Rabbi Gersh at the end of the tractate. The Motzi Amarle, he can tell him, the lender can say to the guarantor, Ilav at, if it's not for you, I would not have given the money from my hand. You are the one that made me give out the money. Das was Rabashi sagt, Bahai Hano de Komhem and Legomer Shabbat Nafshe. But in the Gemara it says that Ravashi said that it was the pleasure that you believe him. That is what completes, and he enslaves himself. Zogder Nemukiyes and Mukir says, Ados is atam if them was lehavi asmachta. Why do we say this is not just an asmachta? Asmachta means that he didn't really mean it. Sometimes people say something, but it's not really, they're not relying that you're actually going to come and collect from them. He just said it because he believed that the borrower will actually have to pay up and is not really going to come afterwards. So how could we collect? So he says for that, we say that since you get the pleasure, it's not going to be an asmachta, which is not koine, and you are koine. So whether the reason is according to the simple pshat in the Gemara, as many Mefarshim learn, that you're getting something for that enslavement that he believes you, or according to the Namoki Yosef, it's because he spent the money based on your saying, so therefore you enslave yourself. According to this, turns out, as the tam was their orav is meshabed nafshi b'loy kinyan, why the reason that the orav enslaves himself without acquisition, you can say two reasons. Aleph shibud ha'orav is be'iker, the main enslavement of the guarantor. Nid der farvos is makabala hanok yitzbei. It's not because he's receiving some benefit, a pleasure, or similar, nor the reason why you enslave yourself to them was alpiva, because based on what you said, the guy spent his money. That's why he gave the money. Was there order what gave him given a moment by Malva? It comes out that the guarantor, he is the one that caused the lacking of money to taking away of the money from the Malva. And as understood in the simple meaning of the Gemara. As das meint nicht, as the Chiva Orav is b'tzadina de garmei kiyotzvah. It doesn't mean that the obligation of the Orav, because he's the cause. Dinah de garmi means when you cause a loss, a similar. No. Ukilo neymar, so that we should say, as that etzem goyim chisur moment shafte fimachiyuv, that the fact that you caused a lacking of money by the lender, that cause no, it's not that. No, das is a sibe. That is the reason to poil sein dem shibut nafshi from the bottom. But the fact that you cause them to lose money allows for your enslavement yourself to the of the guarantor to enslave himself to this debt was because you took out the money, and not that you have to pay because you caused the loss. Das was der Malvot Meitzi given, hat Meitzi Mammon given, if a smach from the Oriv's raid. The fact that the lender spent his money based on the guarantor's word was beweist as der Malve is soimich daite if the mention. That shows that this lender relies on the person because he's spending money because of what he said. Does gufa virktoifenor that itself impacts the guarantor as also meshabed zayin that he should enslave himself. That's one way. It's not because he received something. It's not because of hanoah. It is because the guy is spending the money because of what you're saying, and he relies on you. That is enough to cause you to become enslaved, the guarantor to have to pay. Based the other way, the shivud ha'arav tutzuch oif. The other way is that the enslavement ha'arav is accomplished by he hano the commandment with that benefit that he gets that he believes it. Mitzadem was that Orav is Mekabel Hanoah. That is because the guarantor gets a benefit. Is does guf al derech v'akinyan. So that benefit, that isn't like an acquisition. That's like a kinyan. Was sulib dem, he got something, and that is the acquisition. Was sulib dem is gomer b'shabed nafshi. That's why he decides and he enslaves himself based on the fact of the pleasure that he receives. For the nafkemina beinehem is legabi chonuk. The difference between them will be in a case with this being choked and you offer to be a guarantor. If the reason for the slavery is because he's losing money because of you, that when you say leave him alone and I'll pay by chonuk when he's choking him, you did not cause the lender any lack of money. The lender did not give money because he told him. So it is not to such a degree, the extent, the livability and the relying of the lender on him, because he didn't spend any money because of him. He's just trying to save him now. The b'meila is a need gomer u'mishabed nafshi, so he does not really give over and enslave himself, because it's only when you are causing the person to give the money because of you, which he enslaves himself. But in this case, he leaves the money later on, and you just got involved here to save the other person's life. Then there is no real responsibilities, no real shibud. In this case, he must have a kinyan in order to become a shibud. But if it's tied to the fact that he got a benefit that he believes you, then we can say as also when he's being choked, is that Omar Shafki, when you say leave him alone, then he enslaves himself, the guarantor, the Gzokt Frier. As I said before, the fact that he is removing the pain of his friend that is being choked is a novus that is makabel. So he is receiving a benefit. He's receiving a benefit that his friend is being saved. He's a makabel v'gomer m'shtabed nafshi. So he's baser is makabel is v'gomer m'shtabed nafshi, and he enslaves himself. These two ideas, whether it's mainly because the guy is lacking something because of you, that's why you're meshubah to him, or is because you're receiving something, is the difference by achonuk, by being choked, because being choked, he's not losing any money because of you, the lender. So if that's the reason because he loses money, then you're not responsible. But if the reason is because you're getting a benefit, that's how you're responsible, makes you responsible, then you're still receiving a benefit because you are protecting your fellow, and that then you're responsible. Dalit. And the Rebbe said this is the difference between the Bavli and Yerushalmi. Why, according to the Bavli, we rule like bananas, and that you need um, that you need a kinyan in order to be mishtabed, or like the ruling in the Yerushalmi, like Rabbi Shmuel, that you're mishabet nafshi even by Apizei Shleimar, because this is the difference. Whether as in them b'shtei der chiluk zwischen maskonas habavli, the conclusion of the Bavli as chonuk boy kinyan, that you need a kinyan over there. That's what the Bavli, because the Bavli goes mainly by if you lost something, like the Nemuki Yesu says. Umaskonas Hayrushalmi as a dafnit king kinyan, that you don't need a kinyan, and he would still be responsible, the guarantor. Shitas Hababli is Kipirush Benegesh Van Mukiyesu. The Babli's view is like the interpretation of Benegesh and Mukiyesu. As Bahia know the Hemenley, that the fact that he gets a benefit that he believes in, that is not the real reason. That the guarantor should really decide and enslave himself. It is not genug that only accomplishes shouldn't be an asmachta that he relied that it's not going to happen. But so we're saying gomer shabenafshe, but it cannot in itself accomplish a shibut. Because such a belief that such a pleasure that he believes in, is nit koicha yofa to schaffen dem shibut be'lemorav. It doesn't have good enough power to create that enslavement by the guarantor. Und die sibas hashibud is those was hoitzi momen al piv. The reason why you do become a slave is because he went to spend money based on what you said, and you made him lose money, actuality, by giving the loan. Therefore, when you are being choked, since you did not make him lose anything, so there is no reason that brings about that enslavement. And then if you want to enslave after Matan Mois, you need a kinyan. Aber Shitas HaYerushalmi, so that's the Bavli. The Shitas HaYerushalmi is as the Sibah of the Shibud HaOrev, that what is the cause, the reason why the Orev becomes enslaved B'Shas Matan Mois, when the money is given, is not der Chasrei Mama from the Malva. Is not because at that point the Malva is losing money and giving it to him, nor the Kabbalas Hanoah, but mainly the receiving of Hanoah Shalom Orev. It's the Orev receiving something. And that's why he enslaves himself to come heavenly, he believes it. Und der Riber is me'enze, and therefore similar to this, also in a case when a guarantees in a case where the guy's being choked after he gave the money, but since it's a hanor that he's letting him go and he's saving his friend, that's enough to enslave himself, and therefore he would be meshubed even without a kinyan. And b'yesh loymar ados kumt Rabbi Yossi Yerushalmi Maser saying. That's what Rabbi Yossi Yerushalmi is trying to explain this concept. But Shema Minei. So we hear from this. If somebody comes in the marketplace, says Rabbi Yossi Yerushalmi, that you leave him alone, I'll pay. Mana hai gavi minahan la gavi. From this one, he will collect from the one who, the Orev, who said he'll pay, and from that doesn't collect. Das was Rabbi Yossi zogt min ahan gavei min ahan la gavei is nit a maskana. He says, from this one I collect, don't collect. That's not a conclusion, that's the way it is. As mont oy from them was Amar Shavki, that he is collecting from the one that says, from the guarantor, who says, leave him alone. From them loive is a klal nit goyve, and that he do not collect at all from goyve. No. Das is a tam v'siba of the shibud ha'arev. This is the reason and the cause why the arev is enslaved. V'bald as mitzayna mire shavke v'noyoy. When he says, you leave him alone, and I will give poil teras der malves omer nit monen umeitzer zayin dem loive. He influences, he affects that the lender shall no more demand and pressure the borrower, unashtot them monter by motive, and instead he is demanding from the guarantor. I'll call upon him Bishozu at that point when he's undertaking it. Is that the mid gufa v'kabel hanoah. That is the way he's getting the benefit, the pleasure, because he said, "From this one you take it, not from me." He's telling him that I'll pay. So that is what he's saying. That's a benefit. That's enjoyment. Is that the mid gufa v'kabel hanoah? So that alone he receives a benefit. And with that pleasure, he completes, and is restabed himself. And the Rebbe wants to say now that these two ideas, whether in order to be enslaved, you have to be lacking, making the other one missing money, which is the opinion of the Yerushalmi, or like the Babli, who rules like Rabbi Shmuel, like Rabbi Shmuel, that you do enslave yourself, is associated with the general approach of the Babli Yerushalmi. Yesh lahamtik hey lahasbir hanal, to sweeten and explain above, ados is verbunden mit dem chiluk kloli. This is associated with the general difference between Bnei Bavel and Bnei Eretz Yisrael. From the Babylonians, those who lived in Bavel, and the people of Eretz Yisrael. The Gomar u'mishabed nafshi by an oriv, the deciding and enslaving yourself by an oriv, is kibuvim verbunden. It's understood that it's associated with das man hogas bnei odom. That's what the opinion and how the people conduct themselves. So that's uvimegefin ba'aloche, as we find in halacha, in nogu as in nogu asoichim l'schayim b'loy kinyan, afilu shloi b'shas matmos. If the merchants have the custom to be obligated as a guarantor without a kinyan, even when you didn't give them money, minhag minhag, it's a good minhag. So we go by the minhag. So based on this, we can say, as the chiluk hanal tzvishin Babli and Yerushalmi, the difference between Babli and Yerushalmi is totally in das bnei odom, that is hinges on how the people's mind and their approach. Ubehesem midichilukin the mekoybes Babel and Yisrael, fitting to the differences whether it's Babel or Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says that the Iker Inyan Ha'arvus from Eden, the main idea of guaranteeing that Yidden are guaranteeing, das is Eden seinen Orv eine für die andere. The fact that Yidden are responsible one for another, that mainly comes when the Yidden pass through the Yarden. In Eretz Yisrael, and when they went into Eretz Yisrael, they became mixed and united, and they are guaranteeing one another. Was the far? Hashem did not punish for the hidden sins until they went through the yard. How the Ragachover explained it. Bald called Yisrael. Since all Yidden was just like an individual type. Loi begeder nifred, that all Yidden in Eretz Yisrael were like one category. In other words, there are many people, but they're min. They're one Yidden, and they weren't separate Yidden. That's why being responsible helps, because they're really one. But when they're not really one entity, before they pass the yard, is niktokin arvus, then there is no guarantee one for the other. And thus is the chiluk zwischen Eretz Yisrael and Babel. And this is the difference between Eretz Yisrael and Babel. The Gemara sagt, the Gemara says, Ein uchlusa bebabel. As the teaching from this is there's no uchlusa, meaning the community uh, in Babel. But it's saying the leimar the lekat tziruf, which means everybody, there's no one. All the Yidden is not one uchlusa, it's not one call, it's a bunch of individuals. When ain't tiny tzibur bebabel, there's no communal fast in Babel because they're all a bunch of individuals. They're not connected. It's not a tiny tzibur. Mashenk in Eretz Yisrael, well, opposed to Eretz Yisrael, dorten sein Yidden geworden, of the Yidden became a Metzias von ein tzibur. They became one community, one tzibur. V'lochein rak she'ovrus hayardin. That's why only when they passed through the Yardin, Oz Havikim Metzias Achas, they became one entity. That's why there is responsibility guaranteeing one for the other, because now they are really inherently one kind and all together. That once they went through the Yardin and they accepted upon themselves that responsibility to be guarantors for one another, is the Arvus Zindamut Geboren by Yidden Efständig. So that guarantee, that mixture, that oneness remained always, unumutun everywhere. Wherever they find themselves. Was their far. So in other words, how could we say Babel, Eretz Yisrael? But once they passed, it applies everywhere, even if they're in Babel. Was der Far kenaid moitzi sein at zweiten bechol zman and bechol mokim. That's why once they became responsible, a yid can fulfill in every time and every place with brachas hamitzvahs. You make a bracha mitzvahs, you can fulfill the other one's obligation because you are one and responsible for one another. From deswegen, but yet, from them was ein tainis tzibur bebabel, that there is no communal fast in Babel, there's still lacking. Hayois asidort nito came shlemus from gather tzibur, since there is no wholesomeness in the definition of a tzibur is moving. It's understood as the iker shlemus or arvus, whereas the wholesomeness of responsibility is dafke by Yidden v'chazayin in Eretz Yisrael, that it's specifically Yidden that find themselves in Eretz Yisrael. So even though that once they passed into Eretz Yisrael, that level of arvus remains, but still its wholesomeness is in Eretz Yisrael, but in Babel, ein tainis tzibur means that it's not completely. While it's sufficient to make a bracha and be moitzi another person because of arvus, but it's not sufficient to say that they're really fully and to have a tainis tzibur b'Babel. And therefore, is Talmud shel Babel, the Talmud in Babel, with the arvus v'agdus from Eden is nita fazefel b'toikif, where it is not so much for hello. Hi, good, Baruch Hashem. Where are you?
What are you up to?
I'm trying to do a sicha, skrichtish, I'm depleted.
Makes sense. I spend your day.
The river in Talmud shel Babel, with the arvus v'agdus from Eden is nita fazefel b'toikif. In the Gemara in Babel, the Talmud of Babel, where the guaranteeing and the unity of Yidden is not in full force so much, is men mer neute zu sagen. Over there, we're more tilted to say, as bichdei zu öfton de arves von ein idvarn zweit, in order to accomplish the guarantee for one yid for a second one, fodert sich a meise bepoil. You need an actual action. See, b'shas matan moyes, was der Orev tut oiv ba'amerosei, whether it's when you give the money at that time, so the Orev accomplishes by his saying, as the Malva Zol Bepoil Zain Choser, that the Malva should actually be giving out money, that will help make a guarantor Oder Lachem Matmois. But and if it's after Matmois, then Lamidi Chosi, there's no actual lacking, then der Orev can sich Meshabet sein nur durch Hakinim Bepoil Mamish, then the Orev can enslave himself only with an actual kinyan. That's the approach in the Bavli. Masha'enkim by Amiroim from Talmud Yerushalmi, as opposed to by the Talmud Yerushalmi, Talmud Eretz Yisrael, the Talmud of Eretz Yisrael was dort sein Yidden ageder Tzibur. Over there, Yidden are defined as a Tzibur, b'meile ba'arvus ubis achdus. So there is guaranteed and they're united. Leitzich hashibu de Orev. Leitzich, that's why it makes sense as Shibu de Orev, the enslavement of the guarantor, musnit zayin davke durcha peula. You don't need an action, was hot them toike von a meise bepoil, that has the force, its actual action. Sis genug of them, the hanova said is makabel. Sufficient the pleasure that he receives, either that he believes him, or that he lets his friend go, that he takes him away from the pain, that he does not choking you anymore. And to explain this in the style of the Musar, and to follow up that which was said before, when Yidden are in their place, in their dwelling place in Eretz Yisrael, is as an ort it's in such a place where their shape as one story, complete story, ein ganzer tzibur, that is one whole tzibur, is basé and plek, that it's revealed, it's open. Demult is as in an oifen. Then it's in such a way as yet the zach was serized on anything that touches one Jew, afilu nor atzaru ki yitzuba, even if it's only a pain, is genug zu poil sein, that's enough, sufficient to impact, as a zweite Ried soll sich übergeben, that another Yid should devote himself, und sich mishabet sein, bichdei herabzunehmen dem Zar, and enslave himself to remove that pain. Bis as das wird, that becomes sein Hanoah. Doesn't take much. You are already together. So that brings about your Hanoah, and you can enslave yourself. At his Makabal Hanoah, he receives pleasure from them by removing and taking away a pain from another Yid. Weil mit dem zweiten Yidden sein, because he and the other one mit kind zwei Besondere, they're not separate. Nur ein Sach, but they're one. Wie steht in Yerushalmi mit Mokamach, it says also, das ist wie zwei Hände von einem Guff. It's like two hands from one body. In Bavel, however, on the other hand, in Bavel, wo die Achdus von Yidden als ein Tzibur. The unity of Yidden as one community is nicht efazefet begolui. It's not so revealed. In order for one Yid to enslave himself, to give himself over to another Yid, is das dafke when by the zweiten Yid nivertach gesorgen. It's only if the person is lacking something, if you bring about the lacking and he's lacking, then you can enslave, as felt by him, that the other person is lacking something. In Fall Ober, but in a case, however, when Lam Bidichoser is not lacking anything, Darf Damul Zain by Eden Amaisa Bepoil Begilui, then the Yid needs to do an actual, in actuality, openly Maisa Kinyan. You have to do an act of a kinyan. Was all weisen, that should prove, as there means Meshabet Zain for that zweiten Yidden, that you have intention to enslave yourself another Yid. In Davke Demels, you need that kinyan, or the chasre, in the beginning. When Davke Demelt is not the Gemidas Das, only then is the complete decision from the Malva, from the lender, to accept the enslavement order for the Leiva. And without that, he's not really Meshubatim. What is this in spiritual Avodah Zion? The Rebbe continued, the Inyam Avodah Ruchnis. So as you do the Klal and the Gate, the Drei Bovis, it's known the rule with regards to the three Talmud, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra. The first, the middle, and the last section, Baba Kama, Metzia, Baba Basra. As Kula Nezikin Chodem Mesechta, the Olam Nezikin is really one tractate. It says, and alle Drei Bovis for Mesechta, there are three stanzas, but they're really one tractate. The Inyan for Nezikin Beruchn is Bechlal, the general idea of damages Nezikin is points to Golus and exile. That's when there is a ruling of these damagers from the other side. They disturb a Jew in and from and not allowing him to serve Hashem. That's Nezikin. On the Seches Nezikin and the tractate Nezikin, the Alochas Nezikin in Torah, the study of Nezikin Torah is the Limud Velcher. It's a study which is Mavatal Mazikin. That negates, it gets rid of the damages. And therefore, that takes away the Golus and the Gula arrives. You can say this is also the inner reason because Nezikin is gestalt in Drei Boves, that Nezikin is set up in three stanzas. Because as understood from the Zohar, they correspond connected the Gimel Geulis, the three redemptions. Verbundun mit the Gimel Bate Mikdash, three redemptions which is associated with three Beis Hamikdash. Und the Far is Kula Nezikin Chodem Mesechtahu. All of the Nezikin that we're learning to get out of Golus is really one tractate. While Vigeret come upon me, as we've spoken many times, and the Drei Bate Mikdash, the three Beis Hamikdash nit came under a bottom. They're not separate buildings, not separate homes. Nor is there Zelber Bayis, but it's the same home, but he's never given that was lost. Und der Eibishter kehrt him zurück. He brings him back. It's not a different one. It's that's really the same. Rashi says on the verse, these are the Pekuda Mishkan Eidus, Remez Lemiz, Loshen is Mashkin Mishnei Churbanis. This hints the Mishkan that has been collateralized in the two destruction. The name of the Churbanim is not as the Mikdash Vert Chaz V'Shalom Bottle. The idea of the Churbanim, the destruction, doesn't mean that the Mikdash becomes bottle. It's nismashkin. It's collateralized, meaning it's still there. It's a collateral. But it is blois in a neufim mashkin. It's only in a way of a collateral. But blood ganz, it remains intact, remains whole. But as gefitzach lefishabrishus hamalve. But temporary, it's in the domain of the lender. That's the mashkin. But the mishkan did not cease. It did not get lost. It wasn't destroyed. So it turns out, according to this, is that the last Masechta is corresponds to this last Golus. And this is the chiluk from Tchilas HaMasechta and Siyum HaMasechta, the difference between the beginning of the tractate and the end of the Masechta. Tchilas HaMasechta is the beginning of the Masechta is Hashutrim Sharotzu Lasis Mechitza B'Chotzer. They're partners, and they want to make a partition in the yard. That's the first Mishnah in Baba Basra. Spiritually, it seems like they're partners. They're Eibishter mit Yid, so to speak, Hashem and the Yid. Und der Inyan von Golus is, and what is the idea of Golus? Was mir stellt auf eine Chitze zwischen den Schutfim, that you put up a partition between the partners. There's something interrupting between you and Hashem. As opposed to the end of the Masechta, they're seen from Golus. The end of Golus is Bedina Orif, is in the laws of guarantors. What does his maramis of the Achdus? That hints the unity. Then it is also revealed at that time between the Meibishim and Yidden, between Hashem and the Yidden. Durch der Hanhoge built the Tzuye, b'meshach zman hagolus, through the undesirable conduct during the duration of Golus, the Yidden become enslaved, God forbid, to the other side. But because Yidden are the nation that are close, the Eibishter becomes a guarantor. He becomes the one who is enslaved. Well, we should have to pay because I'm in Golus, but the Eibishter becomes the guarantor to give even the Koich Sadrushim, to give us the necessary strength to get rid ourselves from the enslavement of the other side. Ches. Und das ist der Biur Pnimi in der Plukta zwischen Babel and Yerushalmi. This is the inner explanation in this disagreement between the Babel and Yerushalmi. V'yedu, as it's known, is Davke b'seif zman hagolus. It is specifically in the end of the time of Golus. B'ikf said the Mashiach. And the hills of Mashiach is the Choshech HaGolus and Aneifen. The darkness of the Golus is in such a way from Choshech Kafel B'chopel. It's darkness which is doubled and quadrupled. The Gemara is Metayr Barucha, and the Gemara describes at last B'si Mesechta Seid in the end of Mesechta Seid. Over there, the Gemara describes the Choshech Ruchni, the Choshech Gashmis, the spiritual darkness and the physical darkness by Msev Zman HaGolus by the end of the time of Golus. And this is the remes, and that's the hint, was there seen from Masechta Baba Basra, that the conclusion of the Tractate Baba Basra is wegen dem Din von Chanuk. We're talking about somebody who's being choked. But this is the Matzah Rachman L'Slan von Eden, that God forbid is the condition of the Yidden during the end of Golus. The darkness of exile is so strong. As we feel we feel ourselves choked totally through the darkness of Golus. If them zog the Gemara, this the Gemara tells us that this is boru. This is clear. Hang leitin Babylon hate leitin Yishalmi, whether according to the Babylon or the Yishalmi. As av bechonu haloche Rabbi Yishmael. As also when one is choked, the loch is like Rabbi Shmuel, as der Ore vert meshubet. The loch meshubet, is goyve from the Orev, and we collect from the Orev. The Orev is responsible, and we collect from him. Was beruchnis meidos, which means spiritually. Need kokendik was mitzad midas adin. Notwithstanding that from the perspective of the measure of judgment. Is though anor zu sagen, there is room to say as Yidden darfen allein, but that you need to pay the debt themselves. Is the halacha with Rabbi Yishmael, the halacha is like Rabbi Yishmael, who's a kohen, Yishmael kohen gadol, or maybe a kohen gadol, Isha Chesed, who's a man of kindness, a kohen of Misha Chesed, der Eibishter is a mishabet zu Yidden, that Hashem enslaves himself to Yidden, and sold Kaviyachol and Zeracheves and pays, so to speak, our debt. The Chiluk is nor in Vosfaran Eifun ver der Shibut. The difference is only in what type of a way becomes that enslavement. So the Eibishter is a slave, but how do we accomplish that? Mitzad Bavli, from the perspective of where the darkness is with force. And therefore the unity and the guarantee between Hashem and the mixture between Hashem and Yid not so open. For the Tzich HaKinyan require a conversation. Jeden davon Kaviochel Monen beim Ebersten, jeden need to demand by Hashem, as soll sich hereinlegen b'matzavam shel Yisrael, that he should put himself in their condition, sich Kaviochel b'Shabbat sein, and so to speak, to enslave himself. Ashenki mitzad limud Yerushalmi, as opposed to from the perspective we learn Yerushalmi, a matzah von Oir, which is a condition of light, is the shutzos von Ebersten mit Yidden auf a mehr lichtiker. The partnership between Hashem with the Yidden and a more, in a lighter way, more of light. The Mele, darf ben nor the monen. Therefore, we only have to remind the Ebersten, Hashem, of tzayda the chavre, that the pain of his friend, as the one who's coming to one who is choking, and that he's in tsar. The tsar was Eden gain dur b'meitzer. V'shivya from Golus, that the pain that the Yidden are going through in their difficulty in the captivity of exile, was those which expresses itself in their prayer and the demand, Ad Mosai, up to when we zokt in Slichos, as we say in the Slichos, Al titnu domi loy ad yikoinen, don't let him be silenced until he will prepare Vad Yosim es Yerushalayim Tehila Ba'oretz, till he will place Yerushalayim, praise in the land. Und das ist in Daiva Hüster, it's already enough and extra. But der Eberster is sich Meshabet zu Am Kreve, that the Eberster, that alone is enough. You don't need to demand like in Bavel, but from Eretz Yisrael, that's sufficient. And the Eberster is Meshabet zu Am Kreve, he enslaved himself to his nation that's close to him, bring life the Geula through Mashiach Tzidkenu, the redemption through Mashiach Tzidkenu, was Yibon and Yivna Migdash Hashlishi v'Habasra. He will build the third and last Beis Hamikdash when Koima in its place. The godly Yir Kveit Abayis Hazeh Ha'achrei Min HaRishon, there will be grace from the last one and the first one, V'Meheira V'Meinu Mamish, and very speedily in our days. And this is Mesichas Tezvav B'Shvat, Tavshim Memhei. And as I said, our hearts is broken with the untimely passing of our son Levi Yitzchak, who was a devoted shlichus. It's a tzayit of the chavre from the whole community was bowling in tears. He was a devoted and friend of everyone. He was a chaver, and they're all in the level of tzayit of the chavre, and we're screaming out to Hashem ad Mosai. Al titnu damim la. Ad Yechonin vad Yosim es Yerushalayim tila be'aretz. The Eibusher should say, Dai v'hoiser, and bring us the Geula. Reading the Sikha on Yud Daled Shvat, one day before Tu B'Shvat, when the Sikha was said, and just got up from Shiva, and we saw the side of the Chavra, the pain that we're all in. So as the Rebbe says, we'll see the Eibishter's Shibut take us out, and Bakitzu V'ran Moshe offer, V'hu B'Seicham, Shluchim from the Rebbe, who made a Kiddush Hashem Shein K'Moisav, Sarda Chayev, the amount of people who he was Makarev, with his love to the Eberster, and Oisei B'Moisei, this tremendous chizuk, a lot of people undertook to daven to learn to put on tefillin, put on mezuzahs, learn more Torah. Unbelievable, an unprecedented amount of 11,000 people participated in the funding, and thousands more expressed their appreciation for Chabad, for the Rebbe, for the Kiddush Hashem that he provided. So we should zeicha to the Bin Hamikdash Hashlishi and Mimheira B'Yameinu Mamash.